Hi, Wayne Bergeron here. In this video, I'd like to discuss and demonstrate various things associated with playing lead trumpet. In the different chapters, we'll talk about sound, intonation, time, general musicality. We'll also be using examples from the Big Fat Band play-along series throughout the chapters to show stylistic reference of the different types of music we're going to be talking about today. I've been very fortunate to make a living here in Los Angeles playing music. I never take that for granted for 1 second. I lead my own big band. I play in several different orchestras and big bands in Los Angeles, including Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band. I've also had the opportunity to work on hundreds of motion picture soundtracks, TV shows, many CD or phono sessions, whatever you want to call them, that cover the stylistic gamut musically. Hopefully, a few things in this video can help show you what's required to be a solid lead trumpet player, as well as a well-rounded, great professional musician. All right, let's get started. This chapter is entitled Chops. When trumpet players think of chops, they usually think of the upper register, or high notes. When I think of chops, I think of the full spectrum. When somebody has good chops, they have good sound, good musicality, good technique, good sight reading ability. That's somebody with a lot of chops. So somebody with a lot of chops that just plays high, they just have high chops. So I'm here to talk about all those things today. One of the things I think that's really important before we even get into any of those things is how we set our foundation every day. The foundation for building anything needs to be secure, no different from a musical instrument. Young players especially are always trying to dive into the upper register or dive into something, playing something really quickly, way before they're able to do that because they don't have the foundation in their fingers or their physical ability yet. So what I do every day is I start very slowly. I kind of sneak up on this thing every day because it usually never cooperates. So I want to make sure that I can make a nice sound without much force right out of the chute. And if I can't do that, I take my time until the notes come out easily. One of the things I do first thing when I pick up my trumpet is I test the waters by playing a second line G. Very easy note to play, even a beginner. That's usually the first note they can play. And I try to do this and get it as clear as possible so I'm setting the foundation for the rest of my day. Some mornings when I pick it up, after a hard night of playing where my lips are swollen, I'll get this. Where the response is very poor. Now I have to correct that. I could play louder to do that, but I'm not setting my foundation very well. So I'm going to keep at it until that note comes out very comfortably and soft. So now I can start that note without using my tongue, with very little air. So now my foundation is set. At least I know I'm at a good starting place and I can continue with my warm-up from there. So from that note, what I like to do, I look at second line G like it's home base or home. I want home to be beautiful. I want it to be clean. I want everything to be real nice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move away from home a little bit. And I'm going to go up a half step and down a half step and try to make those sounds all sound the same. As I wander away from home above and below, I'm going to come back. It should all sound the same. I'm going to wander a little further away from home now. And so on. I'm going to keep going away from home and coming back, moving up a half step in each direction, and maybe just 1 octave's worth. That's kind of how I start my day every day. Just to get the cobwebs out of my sound, get my air flowing a little bit. Using the tongue on none of those notes, always starting the note with just the air. using the tongue can be a crutch. I mean, we'll talk about tonguing in later chapters, but if you can get the notes started with as little effort as possible, you'll have a fighting chance at making improvements in range and other things. So when I do these long tones like this, starting at home base at second line G, when I'm home practicing, I'd hold them a lot longer. I'd pay a lot of attention to my sound and the clarity of it and try to get everything clear and really take my time with that. It takes me maybe 5 minutes to get through that, okay? And I just keep going at it till it feels nice. After that, I might go into some flexibility type things. Nothing too high yet, just kind of staying in the same range so the lips not strained too early in the day. One of the things I do is a very simple bugle call. There's many flexibility exercises we can do, obviously, out of the Irons book and the Schlossberg book and the Arbens book. This is just a little something I kind of made up. It's a very simple flexibility exercise. And so on through all 7 positions. I actually didn't really make that up. I probably stole that from somebody along the way. But I'm sure that's not copyrighted material, so I'm going to say I wrote it. That exercise sounds very simple and very bugle call-like. You might notice that when trumpet players warm up, everything's very diatonic, I've noticed, where when saxophone players warm up, they play a lot of notes, they play a lot of cool licks, they do a lot of stuff with their sounds, where trumpet players tend to have this generic bugle call sounding warm-up. That's one of the things that's always kind of bothered me. So I try to take something simple like that and maybe make it harmonically a little more interesting. So instead of playing just in the key of C, as in the first example, I'll modify that so I go down a half step on every beat. So I'm going down a half step by every beat. Be-da, dee-da, dee-da. I'm just going down the positions of the instrument. Gets the same effect as the flexibility exercise, except your brain is now engaged instead of just going through the motions. I can't, count the amount of times I've seen young players with their feet crossed, watching TV, just going through the motions because they don't have to use their finger or have their brain engaged. So I think it's real important, whatever you're practicing, even if it's something simple and there's no fingers involved, be focused on what's coming out of your bell, the sound. It's the most important thing. It's the first thing people hear is what comes out of your instrument. So you have to pay attention to that every day. Stay focused on it. Move with precision at all times when you're moving your fingers. Never phone this in. The trumpet will not cooperate. Trumpet's a very difficult instrument, obviously, much like the French horn and other high compression instruments. Very difficult to make the sound, and you have to stay on it. You have to use focus practice. So I would say no TV, no distractions, if possible. Obviously, there's other flexibility exercises you can do. There's many. It's all about approach. All these books have different things in them. I think, if we all were just stuck with an Arbens book, we'd have everything we need to know. Just all about how we approach the music, how we approach the instrument, and we can get benefits out of that. I'll do some other flexibility things that I've stolen from colleagues of mine over the year. This next one is something that a really great trombone player named Lou McCreary, who unfortunately passed away several years ago, used to do on the bass trombone. And every brass player in LA I know does this exercise. It's a very simple little thing like this. So I'll take that same exercise like I did the other one, and I've modified it as well to make it more interesting to the ear. So instead of just playing it open, I'll move up and down in half steps on every beat. And it gives it a more interesting sound. Getting the same benefit of the exercise, you're just getting you're getting your brain engaged. Now I have to think about that instead of just blowing air. So I think doing that with just about anything. I mean, even when you're running scales and things like that, instead of just running scales or arpeggios up and down, maybe try running a major scale like this. So going up one octave in G major and then to A flat major, and then coming down in A major, back to A flat major, back to G major. So now you're running your scales, but you're running 3 different scales at once. Now your brain is engaged instead of just going up and down 2 octave major or minor scales. And you can do that any fashion you like. Arpeggios can work the same way. I have a little exercise I like to do just involving a major arpeggios. Like I said, trumpet players, when we play these things, it always sounds so boring to me to hear. You know, we hear things like that all the time. So I modify those things and might play something like this. So that little arpeggio is going up in C major, but coming down in C sharp major, then going back up in C major, coming down in D major, going back up in C major, and coming down in F sharp major. You get some neat tonalities from that. And it also gets you thinking as an improviser, going in and out of different keys. You know, on the last one, you get the cool tritone substitution sound, going up in C and coming down in F sharp, then resolving back to C. So kind of fun to do, but once again, keeping your brain engaged, and that's the important thing. Now, let's say I don't have time to do all these things to get warmed up. That can kind of be a problem. You don't want your warm-up to be a crutch. You want to get to your optimum feel, which I like to call it, however that is. Some players can get ready very, very quickly and get ready to play. I'm kind of a slow starter personally, and a lot of it has to do with how we feel physically and a lot of other elements. But in general, I can get warmed up very quickly. But if I'm running late, I didn't get much sleep, my alarm didn't go off, I got to jump in the car, I got to run to a gig, I don't get to play a note, and I get to the gig 5 minutes before. One of the things I can do in the car on the way there is just prepare my lips for what I'm about to do. So I'll do a lot of free lip flapping, and every trumpet player on the planet does this. And it gets the blood in the lips and kind of prepares the lips for the abuse they're about to take. I'll also do things like mashing my lips together, creating pressure, and just getting blood flow going. I'll also have a mouthpiece in the car with me, and I'll buzz the mouthpiece. We'll get into buzzing a little bit later, or not buzzing, and how we produce tone, but this can be an effective tool just for getting going. I'll try to find a starting note, maybe that second line G, and just buzz a few of those. Just a few things like that, even just some sirens. I'll put some compression at the end of the mouthpiece. This way it feels more like you're playing into the trumpet. You have some more compression on there. Do some siren type things. I mean, this is not ideal, but it will get me going. So when I do pick up the trumpet, it's not culture shock for me. It doesn't feel ice cold. Most of the time, I get to work early. If I have a 10 o'clock start at a recording session, I never know what I'm going to have to play. So I get there an hour early most times. I'll leave, if I have a 10 o'clock start, I'll leave at 8 o'clock. And here in Los Angeles, I might make it and I might not. But usually I'm there an hour early, and I can take care of all the things I need to take care of. I like referring it as getting to my optimum feel, where you feel like, okay, I've done everything, I've gotten flexible, my tone is clear, I've touched on the upper register, things are ready to go. So when it's time for me to work, there's no surprises. The people I'm working for don't want to hear my excuses that I was out late or I didn't get a chance to warm up. They just expect me to perform and perform well because they're paying me. So there's many ways you can get warmed up besides sitting down and doing exercises. With the mouthpiece, I've even been known to have my horn in the car out in freeway traffic, only when the car's stopped, of course. I know somebody, high school person coming to school with jazz band at 8 o'clock in the morning, that becomes a little bit of a problem. But your mom's probably driving, so you could do that. So I would say without the horn, buzzing the mouthpiece and flapping the lips is probably the best you can do. You can also buzz the lips. It's not like playing the horn, but it does get your corners warmed up and gets things in place, so when you do get to the horn, you'll have a fighting chance. Anyway, those are a few of the things I do when I'm pressed for time. From time to time, the situation is going to arise where you're going to have several days off your instrument, whether it's for vacation or maybe a cut on your lip, a chop injury of sorts, which I've been through many myself. And different people respond to that differently. I know many players that can take a week off the horn and pick the thing up and be pretty darn tournament tough. I'm definitely not one of those people. Depending on the amount I've been playing, if I've been playing really hard, it feels good to take a day off. If I feel sore, my chops are puffy from playing so much, it feels good to take a day off and then warm up carefully that next day and I feel great. If I take 2 days off, I kind of feel like a runner would feel after running too hard and maybe not stretching. I'd feel very cumbersome and take me a long time to get warmed up. If I take 2 or 3 days off, that gets worse and worse and things start going away. I mean, if you take a day off, I feel like I take 5 steps backwards. So I only take days off when absolutely necessary, whether I'm tired. If I'm going to go on vacation, I'm not going to play for a week, which rarely happens because I bring my horn with me on vacation. So my vacations aren't real vacations, but most people wouldn't want to take their instrument with them. So as long as you don't have anything to do when you get back, if I had to take 5 days off and then go straight to work, I'd be in trouble if I didn't play. So I'd make sure I had time on the back end of that to get myself back in shape. And it'd probably take me several days to really get back my endurance and things flowing the way I like them to flow. When I first started playing a brass instrument, I played the French horn before I took up the trumpet. That came about by my band room being vandalized and my French horn being destroyed in the 7th grade during the summer school going into the 7th grade. They needed trumpet players, so they switched me to trumpet. And one of the interesting things that happened to me on the trumpet was I had some natural range that I didn't have on the French horn. My first notes on the trumpet were trying to play this note. And I was getting stuff like, getting some noises like somebody jumping on a dog's tail. I didn't think I was doing anything good until my band director heard me do that and said, do that again, do that again. And turns out I was hitting a double high C, not knowing what that was. I just thought I wasn't very good because I couldn't play the lower note. So that's how my career basically started on the trumpet. As the years went on and going through junior high and high school, I developed as a player and I had good natural chops. I developed a ton of bad habits though. Natural ability is a really great thing in any field. But if you don't get the proper guidance and maybe the correct way to do things, you can develop some really bad habits. When I was young, when I played, I probably looked something like this. It took everything I had to make a sound on the trumpet. Now I could play these notes. I was young and I was strong back then, but I developed, like I said, a lot of bad habits. I actually hurt myself. I hurt my neck, so I have this expanding neck. This has happened to a lot of trumpet players. Actually, Maynard Ferguson, if you look at pictures of him, he had this. Dizzy Gillespie obviously had the worst case of this ever. A lot of clarinet players, oboe players, French horn players, anybody playing a high compression instrument, if you don't learn how to breathe and support correctly when you're young, this can happen to you. So it doesn't hurt or anything, but it's something I've lived with my entire career, and it probably could have been avoided by just a little bit of guidance. My junior high band director, a gentleman named Ron Sabat, who was a very good trumpet player and became my first trumpet teacher, kind of guided me along the way, but kind of got me a little too late. I'd kind of developed some of these injuries very early on, so that became problematic for me. I explain this because I run into a lot of young students where I see this happening. I see them playing incorrectly or breathing incorrectly, and I try to catch them early enough so this kind of thing doesn't happen to them. I also used a ton of pressure. So by pressure, I mean grabbing this finger ring here and pulling the instrument into my face so hard that I would actually cut my lip. Good for dramatic effect, but not very good for longevity of a career as a trumpet player. Because through high school, I constantly was cutting my lip. I still have a scar on my lip from those days. So over the years, I've kind of figured out a way to undo some of these bad habits and hopefully educate some younger players so these problems don't happen to them. Many times I'll have young students come up to me and ask how I got started or how I went from being a beginner to a professional trumpet player. That's been a long, slow road, even with natural ability. It took me a long time to develop the skills I have as a professional musician. I mean, mentors are good for those things. You know, I can still refer back to the things my junior high band director, Ron Sabat, and my high school band director, Bob Smith, taught me. They were probably my biggest mentors at the time. They were both great musicians, took me under their wing, and showed me a lot about music. Ron Sabat, especially my trumpet teacher. You know, we never really talked about trumpet stuff so much. We played music. And he made me listen to music, and we referenced a lot of things. And we didn't have YouTube and those things back then, but we did have, you know, albums that we listened to, and I would reference different styles of music. And he was very instrumental in my career as a professional musician. I still, to this day, when I teach my own students, I refer to things that he showed me. And so I think a mentor is very important, you know, for any young person, whether they're a sports person or a musician or an actor or whatever they do, a singer. There's a difference between a mentor and a teacher as well. A teacher is somebody that just says do this, and do this, and moves on. A mentor is somebody that takes an interest in you and maybe brings you in after class and helps you. My band director in high school, Bob Smith, I mean, I would ditch my class right after lunch to stay in the band room, and he'd show me tunes, and he'd play the piano and say, you need to know this song. And he'd make me listen to music. So I think those kind of people are mentors, and they're very important in a young person's life. And I've been a mentor to a few of my students as well, and that's always a good feeling to know that you've helped somebody out in a way beyond what a normal teacher might do. Another question I get asked a lot is, how do I find musical opportunities? I get this from young players that are a little ahead of the game at that point. They shouldn't be worrying about musical opportunities as much as getting proficient on their instrument. But for more seasoned players, finding musical opportunities can be difficult as well. I mean, you can be the greatest player in the world, but if you don't have a venue to be heard, well, who's going to know? So what I would suggest in this modern day world, if I was moving to, let's say I was coming right out of college and I was moving to, moving to New York City. Moved to New York City, I would find out who the most working musician was on my instrument, whoever that might be. And I would call them, and I would ask them to take a lesson with them for a couple of reasons. Maybe I've got something to offer. I want them to hear me, show them what I've got, and to learn something as well. But I can't count the amount of students that I've taken in that have been very qualified. And as soon as they've left my lesson, I would call somebody like Gordon Goodwin and go, hey, I think I got a great sub for a band here. And giving that person the opportunity to maybe move on with a professional career. I mean, let's face it, once we're in that door, we have to be able to do the job at hand. So a lot of times young people, like high school kids, will be asking me, well, how do I become a studio musician? Well, that's not really a career that you go out and you seek. It finds you, and it's a word-of-mouth business. So first thing you have to be able to do is come up with the goods. You need to be able to play. You need to be able to do the job at hand. Then you worry about the musical opportunity. And that comes, I think, as we get a little bit older, maybe late high school, into our college years, when we kind of know our direction a little bit, and we've nurtured our abilities a little bit, and we know where we're at as a musician. I guess I wouldn't be a real lead trumpet player if I didn't talk about equipment, mouthpieces, trumpets. Like most trumpet players, I have drawers and drawers full of mouthpieces, weighted valve caps, mutes of every kind at my home. My girlfriend thinks I'm nuts, and well, I kind of am. Sax players are just as crazy, though. When picking a trumpet mouthpiece, especially for a new student or a beginner, I tend to feel, and I talked to the great Bobby Shew about this, and tend to feel that we start most young players out on equipment that's too small. A 7C basically comes with every trumpet. And that size mouthpiece is kind of in the middle, but it's a kind of a large mouthpiece for a small face. And so young players can develop bad habits early on, bad embouchure problems early on from trying to play on something that they can't get enough compression out of. Professional players, when choosing a mouthpiece, are usually looking for something to enhance their range or enhance their sound with the high end or the low end, or they might be looking for a mouthpiece that works better with another horn, and we're always on the constant search. There used to be an old school way of thinking that you just get the mouthpiece that came with the horn or whatever you have, and you practice hard, and you just play one mouthpiece for everything. Well, that thinking is kind of like your head stuck in the standard tradition a little bit with the demands that are put on today's lead trumpet player. Stylistically, range-wise, endurance-wise, music has gotten harder and harder, and it's become more difficult to to play these things on one mouthpiece. So we've gotten a little bit smarter about what we do with these things. And this mouthpiece here, for instance, that I'm playing, I would call this my lead mouthpiece. Now, does that mean it's really shallow and I can only play lead trumpet on it? No, it means it's a mouthpiece that has high overtones in it. It plays really well in big bands and higher energy situations. But I can also, as a musician, bring warmth to this mouthpiece as well. I have a few mouthpieces that I use. I probably play 90% of my musical career on this mouthpiece. I have something that's a little bit larger and something that's even very large if it's a specialty thing, if I have to play a very exposed solo in an exposed situation with maybe just strings playing and something very lyrical. I could probably do it on this, but it's kind of not the right tool for the job. Like, you wouldn't hammer in a finishing nail with a sledgehammer. You'd find the right size hammer, so why not do that with our equipment as well? There's an old saying they used to use. They used to call them cheater mouthpieces. Well, there's no such thing as a cheater mouthpiece. If there's a cheater mouthpiece, I want one. It's it's not the Ariel, it's the Indian. This just happens to be my Arrow here. What I'm playing on now is a custom GR Tech mouthpiece that's custom designed for me. It's my own model. It's called the Studio, or the WB Studio. I also have next to me here a little bit larger mouthpiece that I like to use if I have to play. If I'm going to play third trumpet in an orchestra all night, and I'm just going to be banging out notes below the staff. Like I said, I could do it on this mouthpiece, but this mouthpiece makes my life a lot easier. So I'll go to this. Why not use the right tool for the job, or the right hammer? If I have to play something very exposed, and I really want to sound more cornet-like, I'll go to this mouthpiece. This is called the FD. These mouthpieces are all made by GR. They all have the same rim on them. I think it's important when you're switching from mouthpiece to mouthpiece that the same diameter and the rim hits you the same way, so there's not any inconsistencies with your embouchure. I'll let you hear all these three mouthpieces a little bit so you can hear the difference. I'll just try to play the same thing on each one, basically, and you can hear this. This is my lead mouthpiece. This is my brightest mouthpiece. This mouthpiece has a lot of highs in the sound, but it also has body to it. I think it's important when selecting a mouthpiece. A lot of young players especially are looking for a mouthpiece to help them play higher notes. A mouthpiece can help you get into the upper register a little bit, but it's not the end all. The shallower the mouthpiece becomes, the more adjustments you have to make it sound full, because you gain high end and you gain more compression, which does help with the upper register notes, but causes other problems in the sound. So I always try to find the shallowest mouthpiece I can play and still maintain a good sound and still be able to negotiate all the notes on the instrument, so I can still get around in the low register. So I can still get down to the bottom of the horn and play with a pretty decent sound. If I want to sound a little fuller or a little less edgy, I would switch to something a little bit bigger. So I'm going to switch to the Classic now. Basically the same rim, deeper cup, bigger back bore, and a little warmer sound. This one you can hear has a little less highs in it. If I want to get a little fuzzier down low, it's a little easier to achieve that. I need to make a more intimate sound. So this mouthpiece works very well for that. The last mouthpiece in my arsenal here is called an FD. And it looks like a flugelhorn mouthpiece, but it's actually a trumpet mouthpiece. It's got a very deep cup, much like a French horn, and it makes a very dark, fluffy sound. So if I was going to play something very exposed with some sustained strings in a big room, this would be a nice choice for a mouthpiece. It's got a very forgiving sound that blends in nicely with things. It doesn't project very well. I wouldn't play lead trumpet on this. That'd be the wrong tool for the job. But for something like that, or something that needs to sound cornet-like, this would be a great choice of mouthpiece. So is that cheating? Well, I guess it is a little bit. If that's cheating, then classical trumpet players have been cheating for hundreds of years, going to smaller pitched instruments to play different kinds of music. I think there's no cheating. It's picking up the right instrument or the right trumpet to get the job done well. If you're going to play a Baroque piece of music, you're not going to play it on a B-flat trumpet. It's too high to be too much work. It sound too strained. You're going to pick up a piccolo trumpet where it can be played easily and the notes can be played musically and lightly. So that's what we're looking for. When we change equipment, it's not to benefit our ability. It's to benefit our musical ability and how we approach the music. All right, well, we've talked about mouthpieces a little bit and how they change the sound. Now, why don't we take a look at the instruments we might play and the different sounds they would have. Your typical commercial lead trumpet player, which I would consider myself, arsenal might consist of a B-flat trumpet, a flugelhorn, and a piccolo trumpet. This is my B-flat trumpet, for you young players that don't know that. This is Yamaha 8335 LA. I designed this horn with Bob Malone from Yamaha. Really great instrument. And this is what I use for the largest body of my work, is the B-flat trumpet. And we've heard how this sounds already, but I'll give you another quick demonstration, and I'll let you hear the flugelhorn in comparison. Okay, you've heard that instrument, the brightness of it, of the trumpet. And you've heard what the mouthpieces can do to make it play darker. Now I'll demonstrate the flugelhorn for you. Much mellower sound by comparison. Usually not written very high because it doesn't sound good in the upper register. It's a very intimate sounding instrument. I actually love playing the flugelhorn. I like to call it the poor man's French horn because it's got that dark quality to it. So a flugelhorn sounds something like this. You know, and it's got a nice dark sound like that. You can also get very spitty and intimate on this instrument. If you're going to play something like that, a lot of spit in the sound and stuff. There's a lot of books that would say that's bad, obviously, but in the jazz world, we embrace some of the imperfections in the sound like that. Just another tool in our arsenal. So I really enjoy playing the flugelhorn. It can also be used to play clear and nice if you have to play a simple melody on it. I'll play maybe that melody I played on the other B-flat trumpet. Very diffused sound, very forgiving sound once again, and nice to the ear, you know. Your mom would probably like the way this sounds better than trumpet, less offensive. Another tool in my arsenal that I get called to play on from time to time is the piccolo trumpet. It's half the size of the B-flat trumpet, so it's sounding an octave higher. Does that mean I can play an octave higher on this? No, it doesn't mean that, but it does mean I can play in the upper register with a little more ease because of the size of the instrument. Uses the same mouthpiece as my B-flat trumpet, this particular one does. And it's something I would use if I was called on to play. Something needed to be a little softer and they'd written it too high, I would use it for that. I actually play a feature with Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band on this now called Years of Therapy. That's a very difficult thing. It's for piccolo trumpet and big band, which you don't hear very often. Anyway, this sounds something like this. So this instrument has like a little pointier sound that'll cut through things a little easier without being too loud. Very easy to play. That note on the B-flat trumpet would sound a lot screechier. On this instrument, I can play it with a lot of ease. So playing that note is pretty effortless as compared to the B-flat trumpet, making my life a lot easier. You might also notice this instrument has 4 valves. The reason for that is sometimes we need some notes that aren't on this horn that are a little bit off the horn. On your B-flat trumpet, the lowest note's a low F sharp. these 3 valves. It's also the lowest note on this instrument. Right? That note right there, which is very sharp right there. Sorry about that. That's a little better in tune. I had to pull that slide out. Now, a lot of pieces of music require the notes below that, which are not natural tones on this instrument. So this, pushing this valve, will give us, we have F sharp, will give us F, E, E flat, D, and C sharp below that. Those notes don't sound that great on this instrument down there, but if you, occasionally they write a piece of music where you need that F. If I didn't have that valve, it would sound like, because I don't have enough tubing to make that note. So what it does is it brings this tube into play, and now the instrument is long enough to play that note. Like I said, professional players already know this. This information is more for you younger players. So I can get those other notes if needed. Rarely do I use it. And the piece Gordon Goodwin actually wrote for me, I do have to use it a few times. I have to play a couple of low Fs. So it brings a 4th valve into play. I use this hand to operate the 4th valve. Some players would choose to do this and use this hand, but I have no technique this way because I didn't grow up playing this instrument. So it doesn't matter. However you want to do it, it works fine both ways. All right, we've talked about changing the sound of the instrument with mouthpieces, with different instruments to make different sounds. Now I'd like to talk about mutes a little bit and the different types of sounds and the effects they make. There's 3 basic mutes. One is the straight mute or metal mute, one is the cup mute, and one is the Harman mute. We also have other mutes that are used in specialty things, bucket mute and a solo tone mute, and the plunger mute, of course. So I'll demonstrate a few of these so you can hear the difference in sound. Like I said, professional players are very aware of these. Young players may not know how to use them or how to tune when they're in because they create intonation problems. And every different mute brings on a whole unique set of intonation things. I'll demonstrate the Harman mute first because it's probably the most problematic. This is my Harman mute. This is a Trumcore Harman mute. There's many different brands, and I have every one of them. I just happen to have this one out of my case right now. The Harman mute is used in a lot of jazz settings. Miles Davis, if you've heard Miles Davis recordings, used the Harman mute a lot and had a very classic sound that people are looking for. It's also used to create buzzy effects and textures within different kinds of writing. And this is what the Harman mute sounds like. If I play it loud, it'll be buzzier. If I play a little softer, it'll get a little more bulbous and intimate. It's got kind of a nicer sound. So you can get some different colors out of the Harman mute. Another way to use the Harman mute is by inserting the stem. What the stem does, it doesn't sound as cool, in my opinion. It has a very different sound. It makes it sound more old-timey. This is used in cartoons a lot and for different kinds of effects. It's louder this way, but also more directional. So I'll play a couple of jazz riffs for you using this, and you can hear how it dates the sound immediately. Now it's got like that old-timey sound. You can cover your hand with this to create another sound, a more closed sound. Right, a little more covered sound. And you can use this for effects like they do in cartoons as well. Or kind of a comical sounding mute. So that would be the Harman with stem, and you'll see that written in different pieces of music that way. Another mute we'll talk about is the straight mute or metal mute, used in big band music, a lot in classical music. And what it does is it creates a very icy sound. It's a mute, but it doesn't really make the instrument that much quieter. It just changes the sound of the instrument. My straight mute of choice for today will be the Tom Crown Gemini mute. It's a fairly new mute for me. I have every straight mute known to man as well, and a drawer full of those. They all sound a little bit different. This happens to be the one I'll use for demonstrations. It's a very good mute. Like the Harman mute, this changes the intonation slightly. The Harman mute would make the instrument sharper in pitch. So depending on the Harman mute you're using, you may need to pull out your slide a little bit to accommodate the pitch. On the straight mute, depending on the mute and how the corks are filed, it could go either direction, usually a little sharp. This particular mute happens to play pretty darn well in tune, so I don't have to make much adjustments with my slide. But you can hear the difference between these two sounds, between open and with the straight mute. Both pretty loud, but the sound is much icier with this and a little easier to control. And so it's used as a dynamic effect for different type things. Another popular mute that's used in mostly in jazz music, but in orchestral music as well, is the cup mute. I have a couple of different cup mutes to show you here. The first one is a Shastok tonal color. This mute was handed down to me by the great Warren Looning, who passed away a few years ago. This mute he purchased in 1952, and the condition it was in when I got it, it hadn't been touched since 1952, so the corks were all worn. It was really beat up. I had the Roger Ingram, great trumpet player, lives in Chicago now, who refurbishes these vintage mutes, did this for me. And I love this mute because it has a lot of history, a lot of great notes were played into it. And this is one of the cup mutes I use for different things. One of the problems with the cup mute is the higher you play on it, you have the pitch will go flatter and becomes kind of problematic. So you have to make those adjustments with your lip or by pulling the slide in a little bit. This mute plays pretty well in tune, but it's a little on the flat side. It also adjusts this. You see there's a screw here. This mute adjusts so I can pull it closer to the bell to make the sound tighter or more open. I've got it right in a kind of a normal place right now so you can hear it. Kind of like the instrument sound like made of wood a little bit, kind of a cool sound. Having a whole section of these is a great effect. I have another cup mute that I'll show you. This is called a solo mute. It is a cup mute. The Solo Mute is the brand. It's a new mute on the market that I just received. Really nice. Nice thing about this is it's very in-tune cup mute, so the intonation doesn't go too flat with this. This has an adjustable cup as well. It's a little easier to adjust because I don't have to unscrew anything. So I'll give you a demonstration of a tight cup sound. A lot of times in jazz band music, it will say tight cup. And if you don't have an adjustable cup, that means you have to pull the cup as close to the bell as you can, cramming the corks into the bell and maybe actually even damaging the bell. So this works nicely for putting that in there, then being able to adjust that down and closing it up. And it meant a little quieter, tighter sound. And I can make it even tighter than that by pulling it in a little closer. Kind of being able to change the sound. So if you have a solo, if it's too loud, you can quiet it down by closing it up a little bit. There's also the traditional cup mute that we see all the time, the red and white Humes and Berg. These have been around for years, and your traditional cup mute sound. The only issue not good about this mute is when you need to get that tight cup sound. You can see it has ridges around the side, so a lot of sound is still getting out, even if it's up against the bell. So I don't use it for tight cup. I just use it for traditional cup sound, and it's a little bit different, very nice sounding. So it's got that traditional cup mute sound, but you can't pull it any tighter. You can't really do much with it. But a great mute and been around for many, many, many years, and just one of the many cup mutes. I probably have 15 cup mutes. Another mute used mainly in big band writing, but occasionally in orchestral writing, is the bucket mute. This happens to be the Humes and Berg bucket mute that I've chosen to show you here today. And what it is actually looks like a little bucket, right? Then inside here, this looks pretty ugly, but it's got gauze and cotton And what that does is it soaks up the high end of the sound. You don't actually put this in the horn. It clips onto the outside of the bill. This is used for effect. Count Basie's band used this very effectively on all the trombones and the trumpets, creating a very warm, fluffy sound is the best way I could describe it. I wouldn't use it as a solo mute or anything like that. It quiets it down, but it's great for effect within the ensemble. It doesn't affect the intonation too much. The biggest problem with these, they're a pain in the butt to put on the instrument. So if you have to make a fast mute change, you can see by these hooks here, it can be problematic. So I'll let you hear this. So hooking this on, you can hear what this sounds like. So it's got kind of a fluffier sound, even if I play it hard. Doesn't get very loud. All the high end has been sucked out by the cotton here. So nice effect. Not that much of a fun mute to play into, to be honest with you, but it does make a nice sound within the ensemble. The last mute I'm going to show you today is something that's not used in the ensemble at all. It's mainly used for hotel rooms, so you don't get that knock on the door from security. I travel around the world from hotel room to hotel room, and I need to practice. But if I play with open trumpet, it's too loud. Even if I play with a Harman mute, if I wanted to play late at night, it'd be too loud. So what I do is I use a practice mute, and there's several different brands on the market. The one I'll show you today is the Yamaha Silent Brass. Now it looks like that. It actually has an electronic hookup. You can see there's a plug-in in the front where you can actually wear headphones, and it comes with a little pack with reverb so you can actually hear yourself through the headphones. I'm just going to let you hear this mute without any of the electronics. I mainly use it like this. I use it to warm up as well, like if I'm in the middle of an orchestra and I have a passage coming up and I'm sitting for 5 minutes and I have to come in on some difficult line or a high line or something, you're sitting there getting cold and you're not warmed up, you could actually pop this mute in, and it's so quiet that while the ensemble's playing, maybe you can test the waters a little bit, whether you can hear how quiet this is. I'll give you the demonstration between open and this mute so you can hear the contrast. All right, I'll play the exact same volume with this mute in. Quite a difference. So if I've got this in my horn while I'm in a hotel room, I could probably practice all night. Comes in real handy, plays real nice, plays pretty well in tune too. Really nice, nice thing to have. I've never used it in a playing situation, only to warm up or practice in a hotel room. Anyway, really great little mute. As we mentioned earlier, talking about sound or tone is really the most important thing in your list of importance as a player. The first thing somebody hears is your sound. It doesn't matter what you can do after that. If your sound is bad, it's the first thing that your listener hears. So, well, what's a good sound? I mean, there's many different types of sound. Most classical players have very beautiful, clear, dark, round sounds. Chet Baker had a very fuzzy, airy sound, but that was also a great sound. Doc Severinsen, very brilliant, full-bodied, bright sound. Many different kinds of sounds, all great sounds. The sound you hear in your head is what you should strive for. But for a beginner, just making a sound on the instrument, especially on the trumpet, can be very difficult. The way we produce the sound, the way we tell beginners to produce the sound is to buzz their lips, to go and do that. So a beginner's first notes tend to sound like this. Because we're amplifying this, which is not exactly what happens when we play the instrument. When playing a brass instrument, the lips do vibrate, but they vibrate in conjunction with the instrument and the compression from the mouthpiece. So if you think about resonating the sound instead of buzzing the sound, you might have better luck producing a nicer sound. It's very difficult to tell this to an 8-year-old girl or boy about talking about sympathetic vibration and resonance. So you have to tell them to buzz, and that's why beginners sound that way, though. Some of them overcome that later, some don't. But there's a reason that beginners sound this way. That's all that's ever going to sound like. So I think when producing the tone, maybe we want to think about younger players anyway, when they're learning how to produce a sound, is like maybe like spitting out a piece of thread. So you have a small opening passing through the lips to get the sound started. And that should produce a response. If we want to make that louder, we have to open up the lips a little bit. The aperture, the space between the lips, is kind of our volume control. So if we want that to be louder, we might act like we're maybe spitting a P out. I can actually feel that my lips are further apart at that volume. Same note, but more volume. Once again. For a louder note, maybe like a P. Now, if I blow that same note as if I'm going to play that louder volume, and I don't adjust this, and I keep going with the thread size aperture, it'll sound like this. And that's what many young players sound like when they are first beginning to play, because they don't understand this yet. So by just letting the middle of the lips relax a little bit and letting some more air pass through, you can get a lot more volume out of the instrument. It'll also clear up a lot of problems with the tone. So understanding that, small for soft, larger for loud. My earliest influences on the trumpet were actually before I played the trumpet. My parents had Al Hirt albums at the house I was growing up in, and so I used to hear Al Hirt's trumpet around the house, and matter of fact, he had a song Java that was kind of a hit song for him that I used to whistle. Little did I know that I was going to be playing that song on the trumpet later. So Al Hirt was really kind of my first trumpet influence. As I started playing the trumpet, my next discovery was I heard the band Chase. And this was in 1970, I think, and I was just an 8th grader. And that's something that stuck in my mind. The first Chase recording I ever heard, I was just blown away. I'd never heard anybody play the trumpet like that before. So I became enamored with that. After hearing Bill Chase, somebody played me a Maynard Ferguson album, and that was it for me. I'd never heard anything like that. I'd never heard the trumpet played so powerfully and so musically. And I remember my first Maynard Ferguson concert in 1970, Orange Coast College Jazz Festival. I think I was sitting in the 3rd row. Not that I remember it, but anyway, very memorable time in my life, and I was so inspired, and I knew at that moment this is what I wanted to do. And I bought every Maynard Ferguson record that ever came out after that, and I would learn to play the tunes along with him by ear. And it just, anyway, very inspiring for me, as well as many of my colleagues. And you didn't have to be a trumpet player to love Maynard Ferguson. You know, drummers in my band, they just were enamored by him. He had such a presence on stage. So there's not a note I play that doesn't have a little Maynard Ferguson in it. So anyway, this is for you, boss. I've had a few different influences and teachers along the road that have showed me much of what I know today about the music business and playing the trumpet. A few of them are, I mentioned Bobby Shew earlier. I took a couple lessons with Bobby that were very influential in my playing, and I learned so much about making this instrument a little easier. Yuan Racy, great trumpet player that we just lost a few years ago. I took a few lessons with him, and he was at every gig my band played, and a huge influence on me. And truly, we talked about mentors earlier. Yuan Racy was truly a mentor to me, and I can't thank him enough for that. And it was a big part of my life, and a big hero here in Los Angeles. Another teacher I studied with from the LA Philharmonic was Boyd Hood. I'd gotten into some dental problems years and years ago, and I basically couldn't play the trumpet. I was very frustrated. I actually threw a trumpet into a wall. I was so frustrated. Anyway, I had my teeth kind of fixed, and I went back to Boyd, and we started from square one, and he put me back together, and in about 4 weeks I was playing at 100% again. So great, very influential teacher. I mentioned I'm 56 years old now, anyway, at the time this video was shot, and I still continue to draw on references from different teachers. I recently took a lesson with Michael Sachs from the Cleveland Orchestra. I was back there playing a gig with them, Pixar concert, and he was kind enough to give me a 2-hour trumpet lesson, and I learned a lot from him. So, You never stop learning on this thing. You never go, okay, I'm done. And till the day I drop, I'm going to keep trying to get better at this. And if I got to ask questions, I got to take lessons from people. That's what I'm going to do. And that's the kind of passion you have to have when approaching this instrument. Well, now I'll give you a little demonstration of what my sound sounds like. We're going to do a tune composed by Gordon Goodwin called Gaining on You. It incorporates a few different things. It incorporates some upper register stuff. You'll hear some ascending half notes. And I like to put a certain spin on held notes when I do a crescendo. You'll notice that my very first entrance, I put a little spin on the note. And I put a little vibrato on the end of it. That's just something I do. And Snooky Young used to do that. But anyway, listen through. There's a few inflections I do in here, and you may like them or you may not. But they're how I feel the music should be interpreted. This is Gaining on You. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about breathing and support. I'd showed you that I'd herniated my neck when I was young. That was from not knowing how to breathe and support at a young age. If I knew what I know now, this would have never happened to me. So on any wind instrument, I think it's important to know just basically how to do the inhale. I mean, we all know how to breathe, and we have to do that to survive. But on a brass instrument or any wind instrument, people tend to do different things that are unnatural, that don't need to be done. Just take air in a natural way using an O syllable, like you're yawning almost. Go, and you'll feel how nice and open the windpipes feel and how easy the air goes into the lungs. The lungs fill very quickly, and you're ready to rock. So what do we do with that air once we have it in our system? What we want to do is we want to take that air in, and you'll notice when your lungs are full that your stomach kind of pooches out a little bit. Your lungs are full, the diaphragm's collapsing, and everything's moving forward, so your stomach will move out a little bit. What you want to do to support is once that's out, you pull your navel in slightly. Take your nice relaxed breath, pull the navel in slightly, and then when you play and you add compression of the instrument, everything should be right below the rib cage, all your support system. Not in the upper body here, not in the lower back. I had somebody once, give me some really bad information on this, and my back used to hurt all the time when I was young, and that's why you see young players doing this and pulling their arms in. They're looking for support where the support should be down here. So what we want to do to keep the sound free and keep the upper body relaxed is keep everything right below the rib cage. Our support system lies right there. All the muscles are attached to this, the lower back muscles, the chest muscles, everything working together to help compress air out of the lungs and into the instrument with as little strain in the upper body as possible. When you hear somebody with a strained sound, it usually comes from the windpipes being pinched down and the upper body being tense. So this will help avoid that. Talking about the mechanics and technique on this instrument, I think it's important to move with precision, no matter what you do. Even if you're moving from a half note to a half note or a whole note to a whole note, players tend to put a lot of emphasis on playing things fast. That's not what I mean by technique. We talk about technique. Young players, for instance, who can't play fast yet and are still playing half notes out of their beginning books, should be taught to play with precision, going from note to note with the valves moving very precisely. Even if it's going da, 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 the valve should move quickly up and down at any tempo, and no matter how long the notes are, if it's whole notes or half notes or whatever. And developing that kind of technique, when you start speeding that up, will bring clarity to the faster lines, and it's a part of the mechanics of the trumpet that a lot of people try to skip over, including myself, on many occasions. But I work on those things a lot now. I'm 56 years old, and I'm constantly working on different things to improve my technique and bring more clarity to my playing. Many of the big band jobs that I play on, I'm actually standing in the trumpet section, so I'll stand now. It'll help demonstrate some of the breathing techniques we're talking about. Actually corrects the posture and stuff. It'd be nice if we could stand on all jobs, but unfortunately we do have to sit sometime. But for this demonstration, I'll stand. Okay, we discussed the openness of the breath using an O syllable on the intake. And what should happen, as I discussed earlier, is you take the air in, the stomach should pooch out a little bit, letting you know your lungs are full. You're going to pull the navel in slightly. And now what do we do with that? Now we need to know how to support that tone. The trumpet can actually dictate that for you. If you're playing a low C, you don't have to think about tightening your abdomen up to support or anything. It'll happen naturally within the body. There's not much compression here. You don't have to be thinking about this too much. So we take our nice deep breath, pull the navel in slightly. My abdomen is not real tight there. There's no compression from that note. Now, if I add a little more compression by playing one octave higher, I'll feel these muscles starting to come into play naturally because of the compression of this instrument. Much harder around here right now just from doing that. If I go up one more octave to high C, there's a lot of compression with that note. So now these muscles are really going to come into play for support. Okay, I'm not tightening that up. The compression of the instrument is making these muscles work. It's much like if you picked up a piece of paper and lifted it like this, your bicep wouldn't do anything. But when you picked up something that was 10 pounds, all of a sudden the muscle will come into play. It's the same concept with the compression from the mouthpiece. One of the things you can do to grasp this concept is to get a small straw from a coffee house. I'm talking about one of the little teeny tiny ones with a small hole in it. Take that straw and blow into it. And if you blow hard into it, you'll feel the muscles of the abdomen tighten up on you. Now, if you take a large straw, like a big, large drinking straw, and do the same thing into it, that won't happen unless you blow extremely hard into it because you're not creating the same amount of compression. So that large straw would be the low C. That small straw would be the high C. The body knows what to do, so we don't have to think about supporting so much. If you get your posture into that position, take that relaxed breath, pull in your navel slightly, it activates the muscle group. When you add compression, then you get what you need support-wise. All right, I'd like to maybe discuss some range issues a little bit. When I started this video, we talked about chops, and everybody, when they refer to chops, they refer to range. When I said somebody has good chops, they encompass all these things. Range is one of the elements in having good chops. But you need a certain amount of range to play any piece of music. Even though hitting a double high C is not necessary, because there's many players that don't possess a double high C that do fine and play their instruments beautifully. Having extended range has its benefits. Like I said, I was a natural player when I was young, and I was kind of blessed or cursed with that, however you want to look at it. So, but I've learned a few things over the years on what makes me tick as a player. And I've watched some other students and players learn to develop range. And I'm not a big believer in that we build range. A lot of the books that are out there and things always talk about building range and how strong the embouchure has to be. And I don't really feel that's true, and I used to tour with Maynard Ferguson, and he used to talk about he didn't have a strong lip. He just had a solid foundation of air and a great airstream moving the right speed to create those notes. Easier said than done, obviously. But I think it's important to understand that you discover range. There's certain things you discover, and range is one of them. And some people discover, it doesn't mean you don't practice. People discover range by experimenting within exercises that they're playing. I think it's important for young players when they hit a plateau, and let's say their top note is G on top of the staff. If they've hit this ceiling and can't seem to get past it, and weeks and weeks and weeks are going by, something needs to change. So everybody has different teeth shape and overbites and underbites and different facial structures, and you see players playing off to the side here and like this and like this. There's a reason for all that. It's usually because of the shape of the teeth. And so giving a one explanation fix-all won't work because everybody's a little bit differently. In general, most people have a little overbite or slight overbite. One of the things that I found successful was showing some students to extend their range a little bit was to maybe change the pressure on their lips, maybe it's tilting the head down slightly, or pushing the lower jaw out a little further so the bottom teeth contact the bottom lip. changes the direction of the airstream of the mouthpiece. And I had one student that could play high E, great, beautiful high E, couldn't play a note higher. And I took his bell and I lifted it up while he was playing the high E, and he went to a high G, just like this. And that's all it was. It was a little pressure shift, not a big deal, just a slight thing on the lips. And so for that person, it was an easy fix. Most people, it takes them a little longer to find that. Move in half-step increments. If you're playing scale patterns, you're trying to get to that note, try to get that note, change something a little bit. Don't press harder and blow harder or pinch more. It's not about pinching. It's about finding the physics equation, what makes that next note come out. And I found new range myself just by implementing those ideas into my own head. I know I've talked about discovering range. That doesn't take away from the hard work that you have to do to make those discoveries and the hard practice you have to do. There's obviously a lot more to it that comes into play. We need to think about air compression, tongue level, air speed. The corners are strong enough to hold in the compression to play some of the higher notes. There's a vast body of work from many different people out there on the different ways to approach this, and a lot of them contradict each other as well. Bobby Shew has some great literature on playing in the upper register and what's required, and I kind of follow that letter of the law, because that stuff worked for me very much as far as opening up my sound and helping me play easier in the upper register. Talking about the mechanics of how we play different notes. Tongue level, for instance, we can use different syllables. We use an ah syllable, ah, or an e for the higher notes. I'll teach a young student to use an e syllable when he moves up to the higher note. It makes the oral cavity a little smaller and helps speed up the air so they can get to these notes. Now that being said, that can also make the sound smaller. So as you get older and a more developed player, you can understand how that works a little bit better. I don't think that way at all. I think when I move from one interval to a higher interval, my tongue goes up and then it comes right back down, because I try to use the ah syllable in all registers, much like an opera singer would do. You would never hear an opera singer go, if the word was ah, they wouldn't go ee. They can't, because the word is ah. So you can use ah in all registers, and Maynard Ferguson actually told me that. I asked him, about playing a ballad, and he played such beautiful ballads, especially when he was young. And he always had this operatic quality to his sound, and he said, I try to imitate an opera singer. So for instance, if I was going to play, I'll use two examples. I'll play up to a high C using an E syllable, and I'll make it a little bit extreme so you can hear the difference. Using an E syllable. Makes a note pretty easy to hit, but it makes the sound a little more compact as well. Now I'm going to hit that same note. I'm going to say ya, and I'm going to let my tongue level drop when I get to that note. So it sounds a little bit more open. So if I'm playing a ballad or something like that, I'm always thinking ah in the upper register, even if I'm playing a high G. I'm trying to make it as open as I can without losing the support of the tongue level to lose the note. So that's something you learn and discover, as you grow as a musician and as a player. But using syllables is really important, especially in the early stages of playing the trumpet, understanding how to get from note to note. And then we figure out how much or little we have to do with that later. Talking about mouthpiece pressure, which is the subject of many problems with trumpet players, especially young trumpet players. The fact that the higher we go or trying to go, or the louder we're trying to play, we tend to pull the instrument into our lips harder, creating a whole other set of problems, because now we're pinching the lips shut and the air can't get through. It does take a certain amount of mouthpiece pressure to keep the seal here. What we want to try to avoid is to use the minimal possible, depending on what we're going to play. Obviously, if I'm playing something in the staff that's soft, the compression isn't so high here, so not as much mouthpiece pressure is required. The corner strength should be able to hold all the air into the mouthpiece, so everything is going into this cup here. If I'm playing a high C big band style, we talked about earlier about the aperture being more open, like spitting out a P to play that volume. Well, now it's going to take a little more mouthpiece pressure to keep the compression inside the mouthpiece. Otherwise, I'm going to be giving the person next to me a shower. So that's how we guide the amount of pressure we use. I mean, when I was a kid, this was me. I mean, I didn't really hold the bell, but I was using about that much pressure. I used to pull this ring off the horn. I used so much pressure. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do that, but it's extremely difficult. And that would be a little excessive, I would think. So I mentioned earlier that I'd cut my lip and stuff. So finding that balance is really important. One of the things I would suggest is practicing, if you're practicing range exercises or upper register type things, of maybe trying to get the death grip off of the horn. I mean, you see me playing a lot of times, I have the horn gripped pretty securely, and it's more of a confidence thing. When I'm practicing, though, a lot of times I'll even try to set the horn on my hand so I can only use one finger here to use pressure. And then I might even try to get my finger out of the ring when I'm practicing to see if I can still hit a high A with a minimal amount of pressure. And sometimes I'll find, no, I need a little more than that. And so then I'll go to the ring here and I'll try to make that happen. I'll see if I can hit a high A here without pulling the horn into my face too hard. So I didn't have to pull too hard to make that note. I probably needed to use a little more pressure than that if I was going to play that a little louder. But I'm not pulling too terribly hard. That's probably what I should be doing there, as opposed to really cramming that thing in there. Because when you pull too hard, it cuts off the vibration. Then you have to blow harder. And one of the problems is we push harder, pull harder, push harder, blow harder, and then eventually the trumpet is sticking out the back of the head and the game's kind of over. So we want to avoid excessive pressure. And that's those some of the tools or some of the things you can think about to help using less pressure. Maybe getting the horn with a couple of fingers here, or keeping your finger out of the ring if you can. Along with the range stuff that we've discussed, the question that comes up a lot at master classes with me is about endurance. How do I develop the stamina to keep playing and playing and playing? There's a couple of approaches that I take. The great George Graham, who's a lead trumpet player from Los Angeles here, played on many, many different things, and one of my other mentors. I asked him about this one time because he was 20 years my senior, but could leave me in the dust endurance-wise. I could never figure that out. I felt like I was working like a dog, and he was just lapping me on the track, And I asked him one time about it. Well, what do you do to develop that kind of stamina? And he said, I'm kind of a slacker. He goes, I never play over 80% energy level. He goes, I think 100% musically and 80% physically. And that kind of stuck with me. He said, just back off a little bit. On the trumpet, a lot of times, young players especially, will see fortissimo in the music, and that means play as loud as you can. Well, if you're playing as loud as you can, there's no room for musical nuance. You're using a lot of fuel. That'd be like having the car floored on the freeway the whole time and expect to get good gas mileage. That's not going to happen. So what you want to do is you want to think about just backing off your energy level a little bit. For instance, I'll play a couple of notes here, and I'll play a note, and I'll play it as hard and loud as I can play it. Okay, I'm going to floor the car here, okay? Okay, kind of a little bit of a distorted sound. I can feel my throat going. I can feel a grunting noise in my head. Nothing very efficient about that. Okay, it's loud, but I'm actually overblowing the instrument. So that sound, even though it may be loud right here in this room, if you go to the cheap seats in the back of the theater, they're not going to hear me because my sound is spreading because I'm overblowing. If I back off a little bit and just put a little more focus into the core of the sound, I can get the same volume with a much nicer sound with a lot less effort. Think a much better quality tone. I'm not working anywhere near as hard. So one of the things Bobby Shew used to do, he used to put stickers on the end of people's bells to remind them of that. So every time they put the horn up, they would see that and they go, back off. It's kind of having like a string on your finger to remind you to pick up milk on the way home. So same kind of thing. So anyway, playing at 80% level, that's going to buy you endurance. You're saving fuel. You're going to last longer. And I think about that when I'm playing difficult big band arrangements. Gordon Goodwin's band, the arrangements are very enduring. Sometimes I'll be double length shout choruses, maybe 32 bars of a shout chorus. I have to get through that, and I have to figure out how much fuel is it going to take to get from point A to point B. Still giving 100% musically, but not overblowing my instrument. And that usually gets me through. So when I get tired at the end of a job, I think about a lot of the mechanical things we talked about earlier in these videos, relaxation, how I'm breathing, and thinking about my endurance and just backing off a little bit. And that'll usually get me through the end of the job, and I'll be able to make all the notes. Another thing we can do to gain endurance is to practice in long spurts. Many times we practice exercises. We'll play a 4-bar exercise that repeats, and we'll play that, and then we'll rest, and we'll wipe off our lips, and we'll grab a drink of our water, and we'll change the TV or whatever we're doing, and we'll play the next one, and so on and so on. So we're learning how to play the exercise, but we're doing nothing to build any endurance. What I would recommend is whatever you're playing, take 4 of those exercises and play them together. Play it, 4 or 5 times, whatever, how many times you repeat it. Keep the instrument on your face. Breathe through the nose and play the next one. Always keeping your embouchure gripped. So your embouchure is gripped through maybe 4 of the exercises, or till you feel a little bit of fatigue. Then rest. Then stop and do some of the things we talked about to get blood back in the lips. Then do another group of exercises the same way. This way you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're practicing whatever you're practicing. You're also getting the endurance benefit from it. When learning a piece of music, kind of a good way to learn a long piece of music, if you're working on a 2-page trumpet concerto, let's say, start from the last bar and play the last bar over and over. Then go back to 2 bars from the end and play that over and over. Then 3 bars from the end and play that over and over. Then 4 bars from the end, play that, and so on. By the time you're at the top of that piece, not only have you learned all the difficult material that's on the end of that piece, you've built up enough endurance where you could play that whole piece 10 times in a row without thinking about it, because you practiced it that way. If you were to practice just the sections of it, you might be able to play each section, but putting it together as a piece of music would add another problem to your performance. So that's kind of a good way to practice those kind of things, and been very beneficial for me. When I practice, that's how I practice. I play in long spurts. One last thing about this: when you're playing a big band job or whatever, a big band job, let's say you're playing a 3-hour big band job, you still have to make those notes in the 3rd set. Chops are a little bit puffy. You're tired. So if you've been practicing in long spurts like that, you've got a fighting chance of still having the endurance to get through that 3rd set. If you haven't been doing that, you'll go down for the count and won't be able to make it through. So it's about pacing and practicing smart and backing off to that 80% level, and you'll be able to get through these jobs with some success. While range is very important, I think for a lead trumpet player, consistency and concentration is even more important. Laying down something to say same way every time. When I play in a section, my goal is usually to play whatever piece of music in front of me as musically and consistently as I possibly can, and accurately, and play the same way every time, so my colleagues who are following me have something to follow. If I play it one way, then the next time I play it another way, and the next time I play it yet another way, they're going, well, where's this guy's leadership skills? And it brings in consistency to the whole orchestra that way. So first chair players, that's a big part of the responsibility, is being able to take the bull by the horns like that and say, this is how this goes. And if there's a question about something, maybe that's not how it goes. Maybe somebody goes, hey, you should play this note short, and instead of long. And then, it's open for discussion. And I'm always very open-minded for my section mates if we should play something a little bit differently. But in general, I try to lay down the law. I try to lay it down the same way every time so we can get the job at hand done very quickly. And you can get to the music quicker that way, too. Your focus on the music, and when you're sight reading something, should be like you own it the first time. And if you can get your sight reading skills to that level, obviously getting the music to greatness happens that much quicker. Another extremely important element, and for any musician, obviously, is intonation. You can have great technique, you can have great range, but if you play out of tune, anybody can hear that. It doesn't take a trained ear to hear something's out of tune. Your grandmother could not know what's wrong, but go, oh, that doesn't sound good. It might be flat, it might be sharp. They don't know what it is, but it's intonation, and anybody can hear that. So it's obviously extremely important to be focused in on that. When I'm playing in a band, I usually try to go to the low instruments. I go to the bass trombone, the foundation of the music, and make sure that I'm lining up with that on the top end. And if we get that happening, if the top and the bottom are locking in and agreeing, and then the rest of the band has a fighting chance of finding their place and making this thing sound nice and full. And it's the same thing with listening to the rhythm section in general. I try to lock in with the drummer time-wise. I try to lock in with the bass player pitch and time-wise. And that way everything is in sync. And those are really important elements in playing music that get overlooked by the mechanics of the instrument itself. Always thinking musically, always listening outside of your realm. Young players tend to play with with tunnel vision and they look at their music and they don't listen around them. When you're playing music, keep your ears open, look at your music, keep your ears open, and be aware of your surroundings. And all those things can come into play: intonation, good time, and bringing music to the table, basically. Now I would like to demonstrate a little bit of accuracy, hopefully, on Gordon Goodwin's Rippin' and Runnin'. This tune has a lot of notes that need to be picked out of the sky and a lot of intervals that are a little odd, and it needs to be played accurately to sound good. So here's my attempt at Rippin' and Runnin'. We've been discussing musical interpretation and phrasing, and a big part of that is knowing how to interpret the dynamics and the articulations on the page. In orchestral music, for instance, a TP type accent means more weighted, where in jazz, it means the note is shorter or more detached. So a little confusing for the young player especially. Since we're mainly dealing with big band music here, I'll reference that as a shorter note. Now, when I say a shorter note, when you see this on an eighth note, the length of that note is going to be determined by the tempo of the tune. So for instance, I have this tune here, It's Not Polite to Point, which is a slow swing type tune. And I'll play a couple of bars here, and on the end of one, there's a short eighth note. And I'll play it how I think it should be played. That last note, bop, or dat, however you want to think of it, that's a short note to me. Because it has a dot on it or a teepee, at that tempo, it would sound funny to play it shorter than that. Sounds kind of funny. It says short, so I'm playing short, but at that tempo, that's too short. So the tempo can determine the length of the note. If this was faster, that might sound okay that short. Sounds okay there because it matches the tempo of the tune. So that's kind of an important rule of thumb to know about. But I would always err on the side of a little fatter. Playing a note dit, dit, doesn't have any weight to it. So interpreting that type of articulation that way with a little weight, especially as a first trumpet player, you have the higher note usually, you want to put a little bit more weight on it. It helps bring weight and a power to the band as well. As you heard in my little demonstration I just did, there's an ascending eighth note line going into the swing figure. You notice that builds in volume. Observing that crescendo there really makes that effective. If I was to play all that one volume, musically it wouldn't sound very good. You know, it's accurate, all the notes are right, but there's something missing. So let me demonstrate that with a little shape like I did earlier. Right? Just that little crescendo there makes all the difference in that phrase. I didn't have to do much. All I had to do was put a little lift into the downbeat. So it's as simple as that, really. Now I'd like to demonstrate by playing along with one of the play-along tracks here. The tune is called It's Not Polite to Point. It encompasses a lot of the things we've just discussed. Articulations, swing feel, dynamics, and many other things. So here it is. It's Not Polite to Point. We've discussed a lot of different things here, but now we're going to discuss the all-important musical concept. Big bands are required to play fast swing, slow swing, Latin music, funk, ballads, many different things. We talked about articulations earlier and the length of notes in different tempos. There's also different interpretations of the time feel for different things. For instance, in a swing tune, you would roll the eighth notes a little bit more, maybe even, I hate to use the word lay back, but play on the back part of the beat at times. Where in Latin music, you're going to play exactly on the beat, or it's going to sound funny. It has to be very time accurate because of the nature of the percussion instruments you're playing with. They're very unwavering, so everything has to be on the beat. In swing music, fast swing, for instance, you heard our demonstration on It's Not Polite to Point, the slow swing, with the upper eighth notes with the accents on them really emphasized. Well, if the tune is really fast, that's impossible to do. So on a fast swing tune, you might straighten the eighth notes out a little more, and it's about where you place that accent. Instead of rolling the eighth notes into a triplet type feel, it would be a little straighter. This next demonstration I'm going to do for you here is a very fast tune that Gordon Goodwin has written called Race to the Bridge. It has an absolutely impossible trumpet solo in it that's got a lot of notes in it, and you'll notice in the video here I actually ghost a few of the notes, or I leave a note or two out here just because it's a little clunky on the instrument. But with 5 people playing it, 4 people playing it together, ghosting a couple of notes, it ends up sounding fine in the wash. So just don't listen to my part by itself too intently. But you'll notice on this line, it's a very fast eighth note line, and it would be impossible. The line goes, so it'd be very impossible to go, you'd sound like yabba dabba 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 dabba, and sounds kind of funny, you know? So it has to be straight with the accents put in the right place. So anyway, this is Gordon Goodwin's Race to the Bridge. Wish me luck. All right, you heard this fast eighth note line in here. I hope I did okay. I think it was okay. Not a home run, but maybe a good triple. But you can hear that line, how even it has to be. I'm going to demonstrate the line slow so you can hear the notes that are involved with this a little bit. It's also about the notes. There's a lot of eighth notes here, so you have to figure out what notes to slur and let the instrument do the work. You can't tongue every note, obviously. So I'll emphasize that a little bit too, and so you can hear this slow down to hear what the notes are a little bit. Okay, you can hear that in the first bar alone, I'm slurring the C into the C sharp as opposed to tonguing and going, which doesn't sound like swing at all. But by slurring that one note, it makes it sound like swing. So if this was a slower tempo, I might be able to dig in on that eighth note bounce we were doing on the other thing. I'd be able to do that a little more, but at this tempo it's impossible to do that as we demonstrated. So really important when playing a fast line like this, knowing which notes to ghost or leave out, and knowing which notes to slur. And sometimes you have to get your pencil and you go, oh, that only goes a half step down. Let me slur that, and it'll smooth the line out. So if a line that once seemed impossible, when you put a little common sense into it and get the slurs in the right place, it becomes very playable. Now I'd like to demonstrate something in a slower swing style. This is a tune called Does This Chart Make Me Look Fat? It's a Gordon Goodwin original. The tempo on this says slow, greasy swing. So that in itself tells you it needs to have a lot of style and a really grooving swing feel from the ensemble. We talked about mutes a little bit earlier. I'm going to play the first page of this piece, and it involves the bucket mute that we talked about, and it softens the sound of the band. And if you listen to the recording of this, the brass section has a very cool muffled sound on this. You'll also notice by looking at the music that we have some staccato marks on these notes. As we discussed earlier, just because a note has a dot on it doesn't mean it's real short. It's based on the tempo of the music. And once again, I'll just give you a quick excerpt of the beginning of this tune. The first two notes are long, short, short is the way it's written. At that tempo, if I played those two shorts, it would sound kind of silly. One, It would sound kind of silly, right? That's short. At this tempo, 1, 2, bop, bop, or dat, the articulation we talked about earlier. This goes on through the whole first page of this chart. And you notice when the big fat band plays this, they're not really too short. They've got a little bit of weight, but they're detached. So anyway, this is, I'll do a quick demonstration of this with the play-along track. This is Does This Chart Make Me Look Fat? And that swinging chart, I love playing that. So much fun. One of the things you might have noticed about I used the word lay back a little bit ago. When I say lay back, I don't mean drag the time. We always should play with good time. Lay back is a term that's actually used when you're actually going to pull a figure back out of time. And so a lot of band directors tell their bands to lay back. It's kind of not a good term to use when you're talking about playing behind the beat. Play good time. When we lay back, we pull a figure back. For instance, in bar 32 of this piece, you'll hear a line that goes, right? Beep, bap, ba-doo, dot, dot. That's actually just written eighth notes, but Gordon just wrote the words lay back over it. So we pull the time back at a time and it gives it kind of a cool swinging feel. If you do that on every phrase, it sounds kind of ridiculous. But once in a while like that, it really adds a lot of nuance. So anyway, just food for thought. We covered fast swing and slow swing. We also discussed playing Latin music. And Latin music, the term Latin is kind of a weird word to apply to music, just in general, because there's so many different countries where this music comes from. This particular example I'm going to give you, though, is a songo groove. And it's a tune called How Dis Songo, written by Gordon Goodwin. You'll notice how time accurate all these notes have to be to fall into place. If I'm behind the beat or ahead of the beat, it sounds really strange. So everything has to be exactly in its right place, but with soul still, so it can't be sterile. So that comes from some inflections I might put on the notes. Gordon's also actually added some bluesy elements to this particular tune. That's kind of cool. That kind of morphs the styles together a little bit. Anyway, this is called How Dis Songo. Cool chart, huh? Anyway, did you notice how my articulation changed in this from the first bar I played? A lot more percussive and, yes, actually shorter notes for this style of music. This would sound funny to play these notes too long on this style of music. Just, sounds like a jazzer playing Latin music. So we want to go to the heart of the music, and we want to play this accurately. So those notes do need to be shorter and more percussive in this style of music, and very time accurate. And you know, with that kind of thing, right, very percussive, right in time. The next thing I like to play for you here is a funk type groove. Even though the grooves are very different in these two tunes, the length of my notes and my articulation is going to be very much the same. Very rhythmic and very precise. The short notes will be short and pecky in this style of music, as opposed to in a slow swing tune where we want to play the notes a little bit fatter. Playing the notes too long in this type of music can really make it sound lethargical and lose its pocket. You know, if you think Tower of Power or the Jerry Hay horns, if you've heard any of those examples, Earth, Wind, and Fire type things, the notes are very pecky and short in this kind of music. So I think that's a great approach. So now I'd like to demonstrate this tune Rippin' and Runnin' for you, and you can hear some of the concepts we've talked about. So you may have noticed how percussive, like repeated eighth notes were in that tune. For instance, in bar 42, there's 5 eighth notes there. 1, 2, dat, 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 right with the snare drum. Dat, 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 dat. The whole band has that. It would sound kind of funny if we went pop, 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 pop. No, it just wouldn't have the right thing to it. You may have also noticed in bar 38 of this, there's a melodic melody that happens between 2 of the trumpets and 2 of the saxes. Pardon my singing. But you hear that little crescendo I sang in there and we played it that way? It's not written in the music. There's a whole note there. Usually if you have a whole note, there's probably something more important going on under it, unless it's the last chord of a tune or something. So a good idea is to give a whole note some shape. Not everyone has to have a crescendo, but this particular one is very effective that way. And it's something we never talked about. It's a musical decision we made internally from listening to each other. And I think it's really effective right there. Ornamentation can be the icing on the cake to a lead trumpet player's performance. When I talk about ornamentation, I'm talking about rips, falls, doits, shakes, scoops, or bends, whatever you call them. There's many different things we can do. They can also be overdone and take away from the performance. It should be done with good taste and try to keep in mind what the composer has put on the page. We'll start with the fall, because that's one we see in more in music than anything. Depending on the style of music, determines the type of fall you're going to do. If you're playing in a slower jazz swing idiom, I think the falls should be smoother. If you listen to Count Basie's band, they did smoother sounding falls. So a long fall, let's say you had a note that had a long fall on it, a smooth fall, I'll just make up a little big band riff here. That type of fall, very smooth downward motion, is created by pushing the valves halfway down, taking the walls away between the notes so you don't hear all the notes clunking downward, creating a smooth effect. In rock music, Latin music, or maybe even faster jazz type tune, we might want to fall with a little more energy on it. So for instance, what we do in that case is we hit the note and then do a quick a quick downward motion, pushing all the valves down to create a lot of energy. I'll play the same lick with the same type of fall. You hear a lot nastier sounding at the end. If we're going to do a short fall, like in funk music, that type of effect, we'd use the same type of fall for that type of effect. bow, and push one of the valves down or all of the valves down and make a downward motion, and you'll get a lot of energy in the fall. That records real well. A lot of times the smooth falls get lost in the texture of the band. So that type of fall can be very, very effective. The opposite motion of that would be the doit, which is the line we see going up from a note. There's a couple of different ways to do that as well. Kind of the same rules apply. Sometimes the composer will want a long sweeping doit. Sometimes it'll be very quick, depending on the effect. If you listen to Count Basie's band, there's a couple of tunes they do with long sweeping doits going into the upper register that are very effective. I'll do an example of the same lick I played before, but I'll do a doit on the note instead of a fall. That's a half valve doit. Not very loud at the end, so if the composer's indicated they don't want, it may be transitioning into something soft, so you don't want it to be very loud. If it's going away into nothing, or there's a big section coming up afterward, you can do the same effect with all the valves down to get a lot of energy out of the doit. A little noisier, a little more agitation going up. So those are the two types of doits you can do. They can be short, they can be long, they can be very effective. They can also be overdone. Sometimes players, with a lot of chops, get a little overambitious and do those things a little bit too long. It's not really in good musical taste. So I think use your musical taste to guide you through these types of things. Many different types of charts you're going to play. You're going to see what's called a rip, and that's a line going into the note other than after the note. With the same effect, it can be short, it can be long, depending on what the composer intended. That can be done with the half valve, usually with a half valve. A quick demonstration, going into a short note, for instance, if there's a note on the downbeat that's got a rip into it, it might be interpreted like this. So it's got a little thing in it. When the whole band does that, it's a really, really cool effect. Sometimes just the lead trumpet player does it, though. It can be on a higher note, and it can be a longer rip. We have that type of effect. If the composer's indicated a short rip, it'd be like that. So once again, use your musical taste to guide you through the type of rip you're going to do. That can also be overdone, but very effective on certain types of music. So if you listen to your different big band recordings, I always refer to the Count Basie band because they do a lot of really cool stylistic things like that. A lot of rips and falls and shakes and things like that we'll be discussing. Turns are another thing you're going to see in pretty much every swing big band chart ever written. A turn is if you're going from one note to another and back up to that same note. For instance, a quarter note and 2/8 notes. The composer might write a turn between the quarter note and the first eighth note. That might be interpreted something like this, depending on the tempo and the style of music. Without the turn, it would sound like this. Which is fine also, but that turn can add some energy. A lot of times they won't even write those turns. If I see a figure like that, I'll just add the turn. The turn can be bigger as well, with even a little bit more energy. The slower the tempo, the bigger the turn can be. I think the tempo, much like it does with the length of notes, can determine how big the turn should be. If that was a faster tempo, there's not much time to do a big turn. So once again, use your musical discretion to figure out how to do that. That same figure, we talked about rips earlier, could have a rip into it and a turn. Now you've incorporated a couple of things we've talked about. It could even have a rip, a turn, and a fall at the end, incorporating several of the things we've talked about. That lick right there incorporated 3 of the things we were talking about: the rip, the turn, and the fall. And you hear how effective that is. Sounds good without them as well. As long as it's done musically and in good taste, it'll sound good. Next thing we'll talk about is bends. You'll see bends in many different kinds of music, or the scoop, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes it'll be notated as a U above the note. Sometimes it's got a little small scoop into the first note, indicating what that is. The bend can be done many different ways. If you listen to different kinds of music, it can be slow, they can be fast. Once again, I think the tempo decides what this is going to be. I'll play a little lick here and just, and I'll medium swing type lick, and we'll put a bend into the first note. Mm, mm. You hear that? I hit the note first, establish it, bend it down slightly, then bend it back up to pitch. Another way you could do that is starting the note a little bit flat and bending into it that way. Mm, mm, mm. I've actually, on a note like that, I can incorporate the slide into that bend as well to help me out, like much like a trombone would do. We have these slides on the instrument, and they can help us with those types of bends. The bend could be much slower as well. Let's say this was a really slow, greasy blues. 1, 2, mm, mm. On a big, long, greasy note like that, you can bend it to your heart's content, as long as you don't break it. But you do need to get back up to pitch at some point. A lot of times I'll hear young players especially do a bend, they never get back up to pitch, so the note never really reaches what it's supposed to reach. Make sure you get back up to the pitch. So anyway, bends are very simple. They can be done with a slide, they can be done with a lip. It takes a lot of work and embouchure control to do that. But they're very effective in jazz music especially. Shakes are another effect that you'll hear in many, many big band charts. Dating way back to the beginning of the big band era, you've heard trumpet players doing shakes. Even before that, Louis Armstrong, you heard him doing shakes on the trumpet. A shake is when the note basically goes out of control a little bit. Hearing Louis Armstrong play, he would do little shakes at the end of notes, something like little shakes at the end of the notes like that, that add a lot of character to the sound. In big band music, shakes can be a very effective thing on long notes. You can't do one on a short note because there's not enough time, but on long notes, the shake can be fast, it can be slow, it can be wide, it can be not so wide. And once again, the tempo decides a lot of things, as we've discussed, with how we do these things. So slower tempos, I think a slower shake could be more effective. Faster tempos, a faster shake. The way we do a shake starts out as a lip trill. When we're learning how to play this instrument and we're doing our flexibility exercises, many of the books have flexibility sections where they have you going from one note to another. Let's just, in this instance, just a C to an E in the staff. Okay, it doesn't sound very impressive, but that's how a shake actually begins. A shake is an out-of-control lip trill. And so that lip trill faster, which doesn't really sound very hip either. But if I shake the horn a little bit while I do that, it makes it sound a little more wild. So it's got a little bit more energy. That's kind of a low note to be doing a shake on. But basically, younger players that don't have a lot of range yet, that's how you learn how to do those things. There's many exercises in the Yarbin's book and the Schlossberg book that talk about lip flexibilities, and it all comes from that. When we get on higher notes, and we're going to do a shake in a big band, for instance, let's say I'll just do a medium swing type lick with a shake on it. You noticed I pushed all my valves down when I did that, so it wouldn't sound like a lip trill. I don't want it to sound. It sounds kind of corny, it just sounds like, doesn't really sound very hip. If you push your valves down, you kind of fool the overtone series of the instrument, and it takes the walls away from the notes once again, and you get a kind of a cooler sound. I usually, when I shake, I think about trying to shake a third or a minor third or so, not too wide. A little fall on the end of there, kind of sounds kind of nice. That shake could be wider. If you've heard Maynard Ferguson recordings, he's very famous for doing really wide shakes, and that were very, very effective on certain kinds of music. I think young trumpet players are influenced by that and try to incorporate those gigantic shakes into other kinds of music, and stylistically not very correct, in a Count Basie type chart or something like that, but in certain kinds of music, very effective. I'll do that same lick with a wide shake. very effective thing, and when done occasionally can be extremely effective. But the way to get that sound is by pushing different valves down. If that note was a high C, it doesn't matter. I'd still push all 3 valves down. And that gives the shake that wild sound, that liquid sound that we're looking for. We don't want them to sound too antiseptic and too clean. We don't want it to sound like a lip trill. Now, if this tune was fast, we'd want to do a faster, not as wide of a shake because there's not enough time. That's a little more effective for a tempo like that. On occasion, though, we break that rule, and it could be a very fast tune with a very long held note. And we might do a wider, slower shake on that for effect, where the rhythm section is going, and we have something like that. That's effective too. So, but the things I'm discussing here are basically the general rules of thumb. We break those rules sometime in music on every level. So, but anyway, that's basically how you do a shake. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to play something from the Big Phat Band Play Along series. This tune is called Does This Chart Make Me Look Fat? And it incorporates many of the things we just talked about in it: bends, shakes, and falls. All right, as you heard in that last example, we talked about Deutsch shakes, falls, rips. Many of those things were incorporated into this last arrangement. If you notice in bar 185, bude bude yadu bap, right before the end there, I added a turn. We talked about adding things sometime. It's not written there. It's written bude bude badu dat. I thought it'd be effective to add that turn. Bude bude yadu dat. Makes it swing a little bit harder. So musical discretion can be used there in those certain instances. Like I said, once again, don't overdo these things because then you have too much icing and not enough cake. Aside from the musical skills required to be a professional musician, attitude skills are very important as well. To be a first trumpet player, your leadership skills, but getting along with the people around you as well. A lot of times, let's say there's 4 trumpet parts. You might have 4 very qualified trumpet players there to play first trumpet. Well, somebody's got to play second, third, and fourth trumpet. I come in with the attitude, no matter what chair I'm playing, I'm going to do the best job I possibly can on that chair to make that first trumpet player sound good. For musical reasons, obviously, but also I want those players to be comfortable having me there. It's kind of job security. If I make somebody sound good, or they enjoy playing with me, or it's easy to work with me, I'm liable to get called back for the next job. Besides the musical things, just attitude-wise, getting along with people, not bringing your problems from home into work with you or into school band with you. Just try to keep your head focused on the music. Many of us, in every line of work might have a boss or a colleague that we don't get along with or we don't agree with, but we have to work together to get the job done at hand. The most important thing is to get the job done professionally. So you have to work with these people, even though you may have differences musically or attitude-wise or politically or a number of different things. You have to work with them. So I think it's really important to leave your problems at home and come to work to do the work at hand. When I show up for work, I have to be mentally, physically, and musically prepared to do the job at hand. I need to make sure I'm there on time and plenty of time to get my problems worked out. I always get to the job early. Sounds kind of ridiculous, but I need to have a pencil on my music stand so if I can mark something. I need to pay attention to everything that's going around me with my other colleagues, whether it's in the string section or in the bassoon section. If they change a note somewhere, the conductor says, hey, bar 35, the note on beat 4 is an A, and I look down and I've got a G sharp, so that note's wrong on my part too. I might want to ask that question, hey, am I supposed to have that A as well, or is it a rub here? Just anyway, just paying attention, being clear to what's going on in the situation. Those are the kind of musicians that I work with on a day-to-day basis. When I come into work, we have to get the job done very quickly. When we start at 10 o'clock, the second that clock hits 10 o'clock, we start. The conductor steps onto the podium, and we start rehearsing our first piece. Matter of fact, that first rehearsal will be recorded as well. So we start recording from the first note. So we need to be prepared to do that. In my line of work, it's important to have all these elements together. Having a pencil, having my valves oiled, maybe taking a look at some of the music I have to play that afternoon, so nothing's a surprise for me. If there's a difficult passage coming up, I'm ready for it. All those little things that seem trivial are very, very important to get the job done. I mean, it's a good, even in high school, my band director used to try to instill that kind of attitude in us. Matter of fact, we used to sight read a new piece of music every day. We had jazz band 5 days a week. The first thing we did was we warmed up, and then he'd put a new piece of music in front of us, and we would get 2 shots at it. And he would say, get your pencil, and I want you to mark anything that might be problematic, whether it's a key change or a difficult rhythm or something. Do what you have to do. You got a couple of minutes to look at it. Now we're going to play this thing like we've been playing it our whole lives. And we'd read it down, and I would try to be as confident as I could, and I would try to be as musical as I could, and try to bring my leadership skills to that high school band. And then we would find the problems that we had. He'd go take another look at it. We'd play it again. Then we'd never see that chart again. We'd work on whatever music we were working on for our festival or whatever. Then the next day would be the same thing. So by the time I got out of high school, I was a pretty darn good sight reader. And that has become very important to me in my line of work now, because that's all I do is sight read music. When you come into a recording session, you don't get the music in advance. You open the book up and you have to play what's ever in there that particular day. So having all those things together, those other things that seem trivial together, when you get there, gives you more time just to concentrate on the music at hand. And I think, whether it's studio work or whatever kind of job it is, professionalism is key. I mean, if you want to be hired back again, you can be the greatest player in the world, but if you come in and start a bunch of ruckus, you're a troublemaker, you're late constantly, you're going to lose the job, and they'll get somebody else. There's always somebody that can take your position. So never think that you're the only one that can do this. I mean, it's very special that we get to play music, but we're not that special that we can't be replaced. On the occasions where I'm recording or playing a live gig, or even on rehearsal with a big band, I'll have to demonstrate my leadership skills there. It might mean deciding on how something's going to be phrased that's not marked, possibly. As you know, in many different pieces of music, we talked about articulations in earlier chapters. They're open to interpretation as well. So I might have to say, hey, bar 10 guys, that last note should be short. It's not marked that way, but it should be short. And then everybody gets their pencil and marks that. You don't want to be the person that doesn't get that direction, because then we have to go, hey, that's short, and you have to say it 3 times. I don't feel you should have to tell somebody 3 times to do something. They should be paying attention and get it the first time. That's something in young players that I see when I work with high school bands and stuff, and I give direction. I have to give the direction 5 or 6 times. And that has nothing to do with musical skills. That just has to do with concentration and general courtesy skills. So always pay attention to who's talking to you, and and take that direction and be the one that gets it right away. And you can move on to the music quicker that way. You don't have to ask a lot of questions, and a lot of the time gets wasted asking questions that have already been answered. So as a lead trumpet player and a leader myself, that's what I try to do. And I try to work with the other first section players within the big band, with the first trombone and the lead alto, to decide on how we're going to do something. And maybe the lead alto has a better idea. Like he'll say, not very often, but maybe he'll say, hey, Wayne, that note should be a little longer than that. That's too short. And I'll go, yeah, I think you're right about that. Or I may ask the drummer the type of time field he's playing on something, so we make sure we're in agreement on what needs to be played. So we're all leaders ourselves. We just have certain people that are in charge. There's generals on the Army, and in jazz band, the first chair players kind of make the call on that stuff. And then that can all be overridden by the leader of the band, of course, and he may want, or she may want, something completely different. A lot of times when I'm doing a master class for younger players, I'll get a lot of different kinds of questions. Every once in a while, the question about business will come up. Somebody will ask, well, how much money do you make? And of course, I'm never going to answer that because I don't want them to know that I make millions and millions of dollars. And if you believe that, anyway, that's not true. But I make a good living playing the trumpet here. I'm in the Local 47 Los Angeles Musicians Union. And when I get paid, there's certain scales for different types of jobs that are set, and that's the negotiating point. That's where we start. But I do have a certain standard. I mean, I feel like I've been doing this for a long time. You don't want to give away your craft. For instance, I play jazz gigs with big bands and stuff. I'm not doing this for the money. Obviously, they don't pay a lot of money. There's not a lot of money to go around in jazz, unfortunately. And so those type of things, I'm there for the music. I'm not there for the money. There's other situations when somebody comes in and asks me to play a recording session for something, and they may come in and go, hey, can you do this for X amount of dollars? And I'll be going, well, no, I'm sorry, I really can't do that. You might want to get somebody else. And you have to have your standard. And I think in any line of work, I mean, you have to have a certain standard because you have to think about the time you've put into playing your instrument. And by the time you play from elementary school through high school, you put more time in on your craft than a doctor does becoming a doctor. So I think that's worth something. So if you plan on doing this professionally and want to work as a musician, not everybody wants to do that. Sometimes it's just a hobby. But if you want to do that, you have to have a certain standard of what you'll work for. And I say keep the standard high. If you think a lot of your playing and you think your musicianship is worth something, charge for that. Within reason, of course. And we do favors for people and all of that. It's art, So painters do the same thing, They'll do a painting for somebody for free, but if some big company wants to buy their painting, they're going to charge them what they think is fair. As you've heard by our musical examples, we've played many different styles of music within the jazz realm. In my everyday to-day work, the bulk of my work is actually studio work. I do a lot of movies and television and things like that. I never know what kind of music I'm going to see going in. When I get to the session in the morning, there's a stack of music on the stand. I don't know whether it's going to be big band or it's going to be jazz, if it's going to be an old time, something that takes place in the 30s where I have to think about stylistically what I'm going to do, or it's going to be very classical or orchestral. I just don't know. So I kind of have to be prepared to do all those things. Being a jazz musician, that's where my strength lies. Obviously, I'm most comfortable doing that. But I also dabble in some of this other stuff. And this is where common sense comes into play. I mean, you don't have to be a great classical trumpet player to fit into a section and know how to play interpret the music the way it needs to be interpreted. Obviously, I'm not going to go in playing third trumpet and playing the notes like I would play if I was playing a Count Basie's band. It's going to be a very different thing. So just using common sense. We talked about equipment as well, knowing what equipment to use in that situation. I'm not going to use my brightest lead setup to play third trumpet on something that's got a very mellow, romantic score or something. I'm going to try to blend my sound with my section mates and fit in, and so all the bananas aren't going this way and one's going the other direction. We all need to go in the same direction. And we talked about opening our ears and listening. All of that comes into play when playing different styles of music. The more you can immerse yourself in different styles of music by listening, we have all these great tools now with YouTube. Obviously follow your passion and listen to the kind of music you really like, and if you want to engulf yourself in that, that's great. But if you want to do what I do, or if you want to work as a musician, you need to understand different styles, how to adapt, and how to fit into those musical situations. Improvisation. When I was a young player coming up in high school, I played lead trumpet in my jazz band. I didn't know how to take a solo. And the solo parts were always in the lower books, the second or third or fourth trumpet book. So I played lead trumpet, never had to play a solo. I did occasionally have to play a little scream solo over the band, but I really didn't know what I was doing. Matter of fact, my teachers back then said there were lead players and there were jazz players, and you could be one or the other, but you couldn't be both. And it was kind of that way back at that time. There was lead trumpet players and there was jazz trumpet players, and very few did both because it would spread their skills too far. As I got older, I started hearing some other great players that played jazz and lead. One of the first guys I heard was a guy named Joe Davis, who had unbelievable chops but played great bebop as well, and I was really kind of blown away by that. And that's, at that point, I started thinking to myself, well, why don't I learn how to do this and start diving into this a little more? So, am I a great improviser? No, I'm a pretty good improviser. I'm learning. I'm kind of a work in progress right now, and I'm 56 years old, and I'm still learning how to do this. But I think it's another good tool to have under your belt. I mean, why not be able to improvise, for God's sakes? I mean, it's something everybody should be able to do, even if they're just playing by ear a little bit. So, as I progress as a player myself, I find myself working on different improvisational things. I find myself listening to more jazz trumpet players now than lead type trumpet players or saxophone players. I'm listening to the content that guitar players are using and trying to figure some of those things out, transcribing those solos myself. So I think it's really important to be able to improvise. And matter of fact, in my line of work, in the studios, many times they'll say, hey, we need an 8-bar little bluesy solo here. And many times, I'm the only one in the section that can even do it. So it makes me a hireable commodity as well. I think the more hats you can wear, stylistically, the better you're going to do in the music business. I'm not here to teach you how to improvise, but there's many books and teachers out there that can help you along. I mentioned before that you either played lead or jazz, as I was taught. You take the example of Bobby Shew. Here's somebody that did both really great and has a wide body of work on both subjects. That would be one good resource to go to. There's many, many others. So get on that internet and explore and find what works for you. The idea of improvisation is to be creative. Obviously, you're never going to play the same exact thing twice. Even though you may play a couple of the same licks, those will even be different because they're going to be interpreted different because they're at a different place and time. So I've actually had leaders, I'll play one solo they like, and they go, hey, can you play what you played in bar 3 last time? And I'll go, well, no, because I actually don't remember what I played. The example we're going to hear now is you're going to hear my solo from Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band CD on a tune called How Does Song Go? This solo was actually an overdubbed solo, which means I did it later. I didn't do it live with the band. The producer had a certain idea in mind how he wanted me to play this. So he gave me some direction and kind of takes the creative process out of it a little bit, but we came up with a nice, exciting solo here. As I said, no two solos will be played the same twice. So what you're going to hear is the solo I played on the Big Fat Band, an excerpt from that, and then you're going to hear a solo that I improvised in the studio here, just so you can hear that I took a completely different direction with a lot of it. Believe it or not, with all the stuff we've talked about in this video series, we've barely scratched the surface of what's required to be a professional musician. Hopefully, this will be a great starting place for a lot of you young players to get some ideas on what to do next and what to move on to. Just a general note, in everything you do, strive for excellence. Never pick this instrument up and not try to sound good. Never just make noises on it. From your first note in the morning, pick it up and try to make the most beautiful sound you can. I think it's just really important. And it doesn't matter if you're not a musician. Everything you should do, you should attack with that kind of reverence. Your schoolwork, if you're painting something, try to do the best you can at all times. You can't phone this in. You have to take this instrument very seriously because it will not cooperate. So treat it with respect, play musically, and always strive for excellence.